shows. I have 12 o'clock, so I think I'll go ahead and start, and people will be joining us. So welcome everybody. My name is Dr. Laura Caramonica, and I am the program chair for the Association for Leadership, Science, and Nursing. And today I will be joined by Dr. Laura Thomas, who is also on the program committee. Dr. Thomas will watch the chat. That's where I'll ask all of you to put your questions. And you can put your questions as you have them. Just put them in the chat, okay? So again, welcome. This is our fifth webinar for this year. The Association for Leadership, Science, and Nursing is an international association dedicated to uniting academic and practice leaders to shape leadership science and education in nursing. Today's webinar, we have an esteemed panel of 4 of the major leadership journals and nursing editors, and they're going to introduce themselves, but wonderful panel of editors today. Next slide. The webinar today has no conflicts of interest for any of its content. And this course has been approved by the California Board of Registered Nurses for 1 contact hour. You will fill out a survey at the end of the conference, and then you will then get your certificate. Our goals for today and objectives are to identify how to select a target journal for that manuscript that you want to publish, and then to distinguish the characteristics of the manuscript, and will it be attractive to the journal? And use this knowledge as you prepare that manuscript. And describe the journal article peer review process, revision request, and timelines. Each editor will have about 5 to 8 minutes to tell you about their journal. We will have, this panel will be available for questions and answers for most of today's session, and then we'll take other questions. We're going to use the chat though for all of our questions. Okay. So now I have the honor of turning it over to our first editor, Dr. Karen Hill.
Hello and welcome from St. Croix. I'm on vacation this week, but you all are an important group to me because you're one of my main professional organizations as a nurse executive, and you're important to Jonah because we have a wonderful collaborative relationship. So I was glad to be able to call in today. I told Laura and Rose earlier, I was trying to figure out where to position myself in the room, and my husband said, don't get in front of the ocean or they won't look at you. So I'm not giving you a view. I'm the editor of Jonah and have been for almost 13 years. Jonah is a double-blinded peer-reviewed journal. Our target audience constitutes administrative executives, researchers, people in practice, the nurse faculty, and a lot of students, and then practicing nurses. So it's a varied targeted group of readers. We are circulated across the globe, and so we also publish articles from nurse leaders and others that are projects that are conducted outside the United States. We use a double-blinded peer review, which means that I assign 2 reviewers to each manuscript that I review initially and screen for applicability to our journal and for interest of our target audience and for writing style and those sort of things. If I deem that the article looks of interest and I'm not doing a detailed peer review, I'm screening it, then I will assign it to 2 peer reviewers who are volunteers. Our editorial board and our peer reviewers are leaders from across the world. Most are nurse executives or nurse leaders in faculty or research. However, I have a couple of people that are interested in informatics. I have a clinical psychologist that's published in Jonah several times. So we try to make sure that there are people who are not only good researchers to look at the data, but people who have content expertise. Each peer reviewer gets 30 days or up to 30 days to resubmit their review. Jonah has a rating scale with criteria that they review each manuscript, and then they provide comments. Some reviewers provide more detailed comments to me, and some can provide an overview. And after that, then I go through and personally very critically review every manuscript and the reviewer's comments and notes to make sure that we make the best decision possible for both the journal and for the author. In Jonah's review, the period of time can vary. Usually the reviewers will take between 20 and 30 days to review. I assign them at the beginning of the month. So if you submit an article or a manuscript to Jonah on mid-month, it could be up to 45 days to get that review back. Some are quicker and some are a little slower. Remember, these are busy full-time people volunteering, and a lot of them are interested in and have work with grants, faculty, hospitals, and of course, the pandemic affected people's turnaround time. I then review. It takes me between a month and 2 or 3 months. Right now, I'm fairly quick. I can get a manuscript turned around in between 1 and 2 months. When I review them, if I'm going to either accept the manuscript, accept it with revisions, or reject it with revisions, I spend a lot of time giving very detailed edits to the authors. And I do that because I would like for the next time that they submit the manuscript to be the final submission. I think that's more fair to the writing team since the process was rigorous. And I think it helps give the authors more direction about what revisions we're asking for. Usually I can publish an article from Jonah within 6 to 8 months, sometimes quicker. Right now, this is mid-June, early June, and I'm putting articles in October. I can do things online more quickly, but because of the publication process and the turnaround time, we do have a schedule with the publishing office, and so that is about the quickest. I do try to keep the editorial plans very current, and what I mean by that is I do not plan out more than in advance of 4 or 5 months the articles for the manuscripts, because I want to make sure that we stay current with issues, and that was especially obvious during the pandemic. Next. We produce 11 editions a year, and occasionally on a special year, we'll do a supplement for either ANCC, or we have done one for a couple of other private companies with specific targeted topics. And I love doing those because usually when we do a reprint or a supplement, those are articles that are subject specific. That's a hot topic right now. Otherwise, in Jonah, I try to make sure that there are articles every month that are of interest to readers, regardless of your practice setting. And if you look at Jonah, you'll see that I am doing that, I think, to try to target nurse executives in practice as well as faculty. So you'll see articles that are more practical, like a clinical project. You'll see things that are leadership projects. Right now, there's a lot that's being published on coping strategies and resilience and those sort of things. But the articles that we publish are very applicable to other content settings, but they do vary. Our target audience is 150 countries. We're circulated through Ovid, and we have 66 countries that are subscribers. And as I said, the targeted readers are those that are listed on this slide. Next. A little bit about our statistics and exposure. We have over 10,000 paid subscribers. Jonah has had, though, a large web presence, and we have about 1.5 million downloads of articles from our website a year. We're a little unique compared to some journals. We have a large readership that still prefers a print edition. And so we do circulate a print edition every month. But we also have our articles archived on the Jonah website at www.jonahjournal.com, and that's on this slide. And you can go back and archive. And one thing I like to do sometimes if I'm searching a particular topic, as a leader, I'll put the topic in the website and get articles pulled up for the last few years to tell me what's been published on a related topic. So I think a web page is something that as a reader, sometimes you don't appreciate the wealth of information that are on those, but it's a really great way to quickly search a scholarly journal and look for related topics or something that may be a project that you're interested in. Our impact factor means how many times the previous 2 years our articles have been cited. We're consistently in the top quartile for nursing journals for citations. That's important. And 2 things that I would tell you as a writer. One is titles matter. Oftentimes people will come into an article and try to think that if they write a title and it's going to be something sort of catchy, that it will get people's attention, but that really doesn't help you in a Google search for scholarly journals. And so you want to make sure that your title is concise but clear about what your topic is. And the second thing is, do not underestimate the importance of your abstract, because in a Google search, when they pull up the abstract, oftentimes a potential reader will look at the abstract and see if they're interested in the article. And so those are 2 things that I think in the past, even as a novice writer, I took those for granted. But as an editor, I'm very intent on helping authors make sure that they have good, concise titles and that they have well-written but brief abstracts that describe the projects. We also have a Twitter page, and you can find that on here. I have a social media editor, in Melora Farron from Indiana. She does a great job, and she tweets out articles about things that Jonah has published, usually daily. We're on Google Scholar and Google.com and Ovid. And then I have my editor email down here for you to email me. And one thing I wanted to mention really quickly is, and we've got great editors on this panel today, but editors are very commonly queried by potential authors. We enjoy that. I do, particularly because I would rather save somebody time and answer a question than I would get an inappropriate submission that really isn't good for our target audience. And a good example of that is a really purely clinical project without executive or administrative implications probably is not going to be a great submission for Jonah. And I would rather save somebody time, because when you submit to a journal and upload your manuscript, you spend a lot of time putting it into the correct format. So don't hesitate to email an editor. Oftentimes we can also give suggestions about an approach. I know I've received a lot of COVID related articles in the past year. And I really feel like, to a point, a pure COVID related article is kind of saturated, because thank goodness we're emerging from the pandemic. However, lessons learned from the pandemic, like new ways that we can help deal with burnout and resilience, because we're going to have other issues that affect nurses, other emergent situations, other emerging pandemics, hopefully not for a long time, but ways that as nurse leaders we can learn from those projects. They don't always have to be solely COVID specific. And so that's some of the advice sometimes I'm giving people as they're just now getting time to write their manuscripts about something that could be potentially COVID related. Another example related to that is bed placement. We learned a lot about flexibility and flexibility for staff. Those are not just lessons for the pandemic. Those are lessons that nurse executives can learn from in future. So it's really important. Next. I really like to present some subjects that we're going to be interested in the coming couple of years. Leadership research is always going to be a topic of interest for Jonah, because we are all about leadership. But I think one of the things that we all recognize is that leadership has changed a lot. I know as a nurse executive and a chief operating officer, I was supervising a lot more than nursing. And so the leadership interests that I had were very diverse. Applications for technology, I feel like that we are on the beginning of really adopting and using technology to help nurses. Oftentimes in the past, sometimes I think the burden of technology has outweighed some of the benefits from a practice perspective. And so I would like to see more articles where technology helps either safety, nurse staffing, productivity, nurse satisfaction, engagement. You have KT on here in a minute. She's an expert on simulation, but simulation and multimodal models of education are going to be a hot topic. I think the days of totally didactic classroom are gone. And this is a great example. I think hybrids with Zoom and some didactic and use of simulation are probably the way of the future for education from new graduates on. New models of staffing flexibility in nursing. I know we all had some struggles staffing in the last couple of years, and I think we have to look at some new models of care. I know I've seen a lot written on primary care versus team nursing, and I think surely there's more than two ways to provide care, and I would like to see some emerging models on nurse staffing. Resilience, we talked about, that's going to be a hot topic, and it's not just for nurses. I think it's for all healthcare providers that were affected by the recent couple of years. Testing of instruments. Jonah does publish articles where people have tested instruments. I think it's good to have new ways to identify measurements. And I know one we had published in May was a revision of the Casey Fink scale, which is very often used for new graduates. And I asked the authors, you've had an amazing instrument that's been cited all over the world multiple times. Why are you testing it? And she said, practice has changed. And I feel like that's true. And so not only generating new instruments, but testing and retesting other instruments to prove their validity. Nursing workforce is going to be a challenge in the next few years. I was reading something this morning that talked about the growth projected until 2029, and nursing is going to be the fastest growth for job opportunities for among any occupation. Initiatives supporting diversity. We all want to be more reflective of our populations. And I think anything that we can do to help be more diverse in the workforce and in leadership are going to be topics of interest. Continuum of care projects are hot topics for me, because I feel like that the walls of the hospital have become arbitrary, and we need to look at how nurses can relate better with post-acute care, with primary care, and try to have better safety and less costs and outcomes that are better for the patients. And then health system redesigns. We're seeing a lot of health systems look at restructuring, redesigning, and I think those models and how the lessons learned from those are going to be interesting for everybody. And I think this concludes the slides for Jonah, and then I'll be around to answer questions. Some tips. Oh, I've got tips for publishing, and we've already covered some of these. Read the guidelines for the authors. We use AMA, and I like it because you don't have to publish the names of the articles when you're citing them. You just publish a number. It saves word count, which I like, but it's different. A lot of schools haven't taught that, but it's easy to use. Query the editor, as we said. And if you're a beginner, do not think that you cannot publish in a great scholarly journal because you can. And there are episodes where we've had an author email me and say, this is my first submission. That is not a problem. If it's a really great manuscript and a good project, I'm glad to help somebody publish their first publication. Look for other similar topics. What I talked about with the pandemic is things that get saturated. That means if we published a lot in the last few months or years, we may not want to publish too many more topics on that same subject. So you want to look at the last few years of your topic. If you're conducting research, be sure and submit your project to an IRB. It gives you validity. And that's something most journals are requiring now. And then get the experience of a statistician or author who's published if you have not published much, so you can make sure your data are presented well. So I know that's my last one. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. I'm KT Waxman. I am the editor-in-chief for Nursing Administration Quarterly. I just want to say a shout out to all my students who have joined today. Great that you're on. Our mission is to provide nurse leaders with practical, up-to-date information on effective management of nursing services in all healthcare settings, all along the continuum. Next. We're a little different in that we publish our journal 4 times a year, and we have guest editors that are from our editorial board, 1 or 2, depends on the topic, and they ask and actually invite authors to write on a specific topic. We do accept unsolicited articles as well, and what I do is I read those and determine whether or not they will be a good fit for one of our 4 topical articles in that year. I recently accepted one that is a fit for an issue 2 or 3 issues from now, and it's up to the author if they want to wait, but it was really appropriate, and they said that they would not mind waiting until that issue came out. So we always have unsolicited articles, so please think about submitting to our journal. And as Karen said, a query letter is always a good one. I can tell you right off the bat whether it's going to be appropriate or not, and save you the time of going through the process of submitting if in fact it isn't appropriate for a journal. So each of our issues focuses on a specific topic. Some of the examples of topics were recently the value of nursing, the pandemic, the ultimate disruptor, which everyone has written about, as Karen mentioned, the state of affairs during the COVID pandemic, and then what happened after, like what did we learn from this? And as Karen said, we have been receiving lots and lots of manuscripts on COVID related topics. And so we were looking for things that are very unique and that span the continuum and that really lift nursing leadership. We have one issue a year that I call a potpourri. We changed this recently. I have been in this role for 1.5 years only, and so subtle changes are being made as we go along. And one of them was, instead of having a topical issue, we called it boundary spanning leadership, just a potpourri of leadership. And that one is in production right now. Nora Warshowski, who is our associate editor, was the guest editor with Rhonda Anderson on that. It's going to be a wonderful issue. And based on the feedback, we'll probably do it again next year. Innovation in healthcare models, and then moving the past to the future. What have we learned and what can we apply? Our peer review process is similar to Jonah. We have our solicited or non-solicited articles come through editorial manager, and then we select 2 to 3 reviewers from our list of reviewers, and those are selected by the guest editors based on their availability and specialty area. And then we send them back to the author for revisions. If it's a revise, then there's editing done, and then it comes back. And then if it has met the criteria of the reviewer's suggestions, then we will accept it. Some of our article types are experience-based advice, like the value of nursing, COVID-19 perspectives from frontline critical care nurses in New York, which was one of the hubs of COVID. So we got information about what folks did in the thick of COVID and international. We had an article from Milan, where we know was a very hotbed of COVID, and how they navigated the system. That was very interesting. We also do some interviews and book reviews. We do a book review probably 3 times a year on a leadership book. And we also have done interviews, most recently an interview with Tom Ahrens that really focused on nurse-led entrepreneurship. And then Betty Falter reviewed Kathy Robinson Walker's latest leadership book. We have leadership studies like Cole Edmondson, Marshall and Gogek's article on workplace environment. And then we have research articles that are approved by IRB, and Sil Champagné and Pat and et al. Nursing leaders' assumptions and attitudes towards residency programs for new grad nurses. So we have sort of a potpourri of types of articles. And most recently, I wanted to make note that we have added a column that will be coming out in our latest issue called Finance Matters in Nursing Leadership. And Dr. Todd Smith and Teresa have, I can't remember her name.
Teresa Welch.
Teresa Welch. I was going to say Walker, are our first authors on that column. And we're so excited to have that. It's really designed to provide tips and tools for nurse leaders and aspiring nurse leaders. So next slide, please. Thank you, Todd. So we have a lot of support for our authors. We have just revised our author guidelines. And as Jonah, we are all AMA style writing. And I think that's a good point, Karen, that you raised, that it's actually easier and it saves on word count. For most of us that are in academia, at least in my school, we teach APA. So it's a little jump. And I'm thinking that we might want to add in a little AMA as well in our scholarly writing class. So the peer review gives comments and suggestions. And I think that our reviewers are really good at helping these authors, especially the new ones, find a way to get their work out in a scholarly way, and they provide suggestions for improvement if needed. And we also have online articles. We have a electronic table of contents, and I am all on Twitter and LinkedIn and all over the place myself. I don't have an assistant to do that. So when you see the tweets coming out, it's me. We have a hashtag NAQ Journal. And I hope that you will follow me on Twitter at KT Waxman and retweet what we tweet. And we're trying to free up articles that we can actually send out to the masses. Dr. Nora Warshawski has a column on our website called Continuing the Conversations. And each month we free up articles for you to download and read on your own. And they're designed for faculty and hospital administrators, nurse leaders to use as a starting point for dialogue around the topic. So we hope that you'll incorporate that into your curriculum and even your staff meetings. Next slide. I think that might be it. Yeah. So I look forward to participating in the panel that's coming up. Thank you.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Donna Nikitas. I am the editor for Nursing in Economics. My day job is I am a dean and professor of nursing at Rutgers University in Camden, New Jersey. What a pleasure to have the opportunity to stress upon all of you who've joined us today the importance of writing. When you write, you change the world. You take your words and you demonstrate your scholarship, your practice and research for perpetuity, and so that your words live on in your history. And now more than ever, the importance of scientific writing is to bring to bear the science of the discipline and also the evidence to practice. So you're here, all of us say to you that you have an imperative to share your knowledge, your scholarship, and your leadership through their writing. Now, that doesn't happen through one webinar, obviously. It has taken all of us to gather the expertise, the knowledge, not only to write ourselves, but to guide others in the process. And so what we're going to share with you, obviously, very shortly in the question and answers is how to break down the barriers, how to encourage you to seek support. And I was so glad to hear my colleagues say to you, when you're first out of the gate, ask a buddy or a colleague to write with you so they can guide you in the process. For those of us in academia, we often are the senior writers or authors on articles because we guide our PhD, DH students or doctorally DMP students and even our master students to write, not to get rejected, but to get accepted. And so we'll talk more about that. The mission of nursing economics, obviously, is to advance nursing leadership in healthcare with a focus on the future, looking at information and thoughtful analysis of current and emerging practices, as you've heard previously, on issues that are timely and relevant. We tend to focus more on healthcare management, obviously the economics and policy of healthcare, because so much of healthcare is driven around the values of safety, of equity, of cost effectiveness. And so we want to make sure that we're guiding authors through that. We seek to support leaders who are responsible for directing, let me emphasize, nursing's impact on healthcare cost and quality. We are published 6 times a year. So next slide, please. As we bring up the next slide, and I share with you our focus, most importantly, as editors, we get to drive the content that we believe is most appropriate for the time. And if you've read my editorials for the last year, they've been all COVID related and following the pandemic through a diversity of impact. But that's the beauty of being the editor, because we drive the issues in each of the selected manuscripts based upon their bi-monthly publication. So this is just showing you that we go from January to February, all the way down to November and December. We look again to be timely and responsive to inquiries. So again, speaking to my colleagues who have already spoken, I don't mind an inquiry. I encourage it, because I can, one or two things. Is the topic something that's appropriate to our readership? Each focus journal has a particular readership that is following their content. So, and a follow-up. Also, it helps me get an idea of what the content is, as I heard you say earlier. If it's not appropriate for this upcoming manuscript on my dossier, I can think of planning down the line. So we have our author guidelines on our website, and we encourage authors to use them. There's nothing worse than getting an author to finally commit to a manuscript to you and only find out that they didn't follow the guidelines. Very disappointing. We do provide comprehensive feedback. Sometimes I have to encourage my reviewers, don't worry about the grammar, worry about the content and the timeliness. And by that I mean is, who are you citing? Do you know the gap? Have you looked at the literature? You know, I don't want articles that are referenced 8 or 10 years ago. I want things that are current, mostly, certainly within the last 5 years, preferably within the last 2 or 3 years. And that's the content that I use as editor to be transparent when I make a decision, whether I accept it for publication. And those, first few, I can probably count them on maybe both hands, where I get a manuscript and there are no changes, but most often there are a couple of changes or revisions. But then I take the recommendations from my reviewers and I assess them, critique them, and then give the feedback based on what the editors or the viewers are actually asking for from the editor. Next slide, please. So what's the review process? We are a referee journal. All our manuscripts go under review by myself first, whether it's worthy for review. Sometimes I don't want to take advantage of my peer review panel and send them something that I don't think is going to have a appropriate fit or worth the review. So it's blind reviewed by my panel, which then comes back to me or sent out to my editorial board should I need it. We try to promise timeliness, and I can say timeliness is what from the time that we receive the journal, probably somewhere between 3 to 6 months for review, and then return back to the editor, to the author, and for changes, whether it needs clarity, accuracy, or whether it's applicability to us. So the review process takes 4 months for sure. It was been a little slow with COVID around, but once it's accepted, they usually publish within 1 year. Sometimes, depending on the timeliness, if it's really hot, we'll publish it ahead online on our website, followed by the following month for publication in the actual journal itself. Next slide. So what do we publish? We publish original research. We publish evidence-based quality improvement projects. Obviously, as an academic, many of our DMP programs are now putting out well-qualified manuscripts on focus quality improvement projects. So we tend to do that as well. We do focus on healthcare improvement, quality advancement in practice, and certainly education. We look at financial implications, quality implication, and obviously cost saving implications. We do special issues. We will do a special issue this in January and February 2022. The call for abstracts has come out, and this is what have we learned from COVID? What have we learned about health disparities? What have we learned about our public health infrastructure? What's the implication moving forward with migration and climate? So there's a lot of issues that are healthcare related and important in the special issue. We do have columns in our journal. We probably, in the journal, we do 4 to 5 key manuscripts and then follow with timely columns. We've done ambulatory care, impacts and innovation, on leadership, nurses on boards, global health. We just had a recent column come out on the finance of why it's so important that CNOs and others understand their own finance commitments and obligations. And then we feature what is called Nursing Economics podcast series, and we publish those online free to all our readership and others, and they've been quite popular. In fact, I threw in the top 25, actually 14 of nursing podcast series that have been evaluated and rated, and they're very timely. Often we'll take a column or a manuscript and interview the authors of that manuscript and have a conversation about what they've written, why they wrote it, and the implications for nursing practice. Who reads the journal? I like to say it's leaders of nursing, nursing in general, obviously executives and leaders. We do reach deans, nursing faculty, nurse managers, CNOs, and CEOs. What we don't publish, which is why it's very important for potential and future authors to remember, do your homework, determine the content and the readership of the journal of which you'd like to share your manuscript with. And so we don't do systematic reviews, meta-analysis. They take up a lot of space in journals, but if they do have financial or economic implications, we tend to publish them. Next. Okay, so we're ready for Rose. Was that
okay? Well, thank you, Donna. And I'm Rose Sherman. I'm the editor-in-chief of Nurse Leader. I've been the editor for the past 6 years. And I just like to reiterate something that Donna said. I think it's so important that as nurses, we write. One of the most frustrating things I can tell you as an editor is that I know that there's some great work going on, particularly out there in practice settings, and it's never getting into the journals. And so one of the things I do as an editor is, in addition to having unsolicited and solicited manuscripts coming in, I will reach out to some folks that are doing some really futuristic work and try to get them to write manuscripts. And very often they'll say to me, you know, I'm just too busy to write. But if we don't get it in the literature, then the word really doesn't get out. So very, very important point that you made there, Donna. Nurse Leader's mission is really to design to provide vision, skills, and tools needed by nurses that are either in or aspire to be in leadership positions. Our articles are we really try to feature best practices, policy changes, and leadership innovations, and really strive, particularly with today's reader, to make it in an easy to read format with a focus on outcomes. And I just wanted to say a word about length, because I just got a manuscript in the other day that was close to 4,000 words. It's really important to realize that our demographics of nurses have really shifted. And so I like to keep the manuscripts between about 2,500 and 3,000 words, because that's about the attention span of our readers today. And so we've got to be cognizant about that. We're published bi-monthly. We are published by Elsevier. I feel really good about that because we're one of 2,000 journals that Elsevier publishes globally. So we have a lot of resources that are available to us, and we are on their part of their Science Direct and Clinical Keys collection. So we have very, very broad distribution globally. Almost every university in the world has a subscription to Science Direct. So we know we're able to really see with the Plum, we have a Plum metric system where we can really look at who's doing the downloads. And it's amazing, although most of our articles are written in the United States, we're seeing an increasing number of downloads really throughout the world. We are not a peer-reviewed journal. We're built on the Harvard Business Review model. Our prior editor and founding editor, Dr. Roxanne Spitzer, looked at the model that Harvard had put together. And so we use an editorial board review model. Every article goes through the scrutiny of 3 editorial board members or the guest editor if the guest editor is not on the editorial board. So we have a guest editor for every issue but 1 each year. Plus we take unsolicited articles, and in some cases solicited articles where I've actually reached out and asked somebody to write the work. As I said, the time to publication, I think it's such a good point that the other editors have written, have talked about. We're all on this cycle, and I know it's frustrating for writers, but right now with Nurse Leader, I'm working on the October issue. So the time to publication for us is about 6 to 12 months. We do have the ability to put articles online before they go into press, work very hard if we see an article is a really hot topic to get it into the quickest issue that we can. And we also try to keep our authors posted on when their article will get published. So these are the issue dates of our publications. We do one focused issue a year. It's usually our April issue. We did an April issue this year on lessons learned from COVID. Our April issue for 2022 will be on the nursing workforce. We accept both solicited and unsolicited manuscripts. Currently, I feel very fortunate about this because although we have a very large print distribution, where I'm able to put 14 articles in every issue, and that's separate from the columns and other things that we have in the journal. And as I mentioned, articles can be published online before print. We also offer an option for open access, and sometimes we get companies like Press Ganey or Vizient that want to go open access on their articles, and they have the ability to pay Elsevier to be able to do that if they plan to use it in marketing with their customers. Articles that we look for about it, we are a specialty organization journal, so the American Organization of Nurse Leaders, every single member of that organization gets a print copy of the journal. So we pay very close attention, realizing that that really is our target audience practicing nurse leaders. About 50% of AONL right now are managers and directors, and 50% are at the executive level. We're especially interested in articles with innovative practices with outcomes. You know, having an innovative practice is one thing, having the outcomes and a discussion about how it could be used in other organizations, that's really what we're interested in. We're also interested in timely leadership thought pieces. Just got one in that we're going to be publishing in an upcoming journal on a grief that was written by a chief nursing officer that was just absolutely outstanding. We do accept research. However, our focus in the research is mostly on the outcomes. So the methodology piece, while important, should not be the focus of the article. It really should be leadership implications and answering the question, so what? And research, we're a little unique within Nurse Leader in that we will publish both types of research. We'll publish the traditional research that has been through an investigational review board. We'll also publish what falls into the category of market research. And this is research that is really being done by some of our larger companies or professional associations that does not go through IRB, but has very important implications, usually because it has very large sample sizes. Articles that we don't publish, I think that, Donna made a really important point, so did Karen, that you really need to know what types of articles a journal publishes and what types of articles they're not going to publish. We don't publish articles that are targeted to academic leaders, recognizing who our readership is. And as an editor, I think one of your big responsibilities is to look at every article through the lens of the reader. We don't publish articles, and Karen mentioned this, we get articles that are very often very clinically focused, but they don't have broader leadership implications. We don't publish systematic reviews of the literature. We don't publish an analysis of a concept. We don't publish integrative research reviews, and we don't publish theoretical reviews. Now, I think it's important to talk about why articles do get rejected. What are some of the key reasons? And these are the top 8, at least for Nurse Leader. The first one is that it's not geared to the target readership of the journal, and it really falls into the category of being out of scope. That's why knowing who the target readership is for a journal becomes very important. So reviewing the mission, reviewing the vision of the journal is really important from a writer standpoint. Very often we get well-written articles, but it's not new information for the journal readership. Somebody will go out there and they'll learn a lot about transformational leadership. They'll put an article together, but it really doesn't contain anything new on the topic. Sometimes articles have no significant implications or impact, and these tend to be small research studies. The other day I reviewed a qualitative research study that only had 5 participants. While that might be okay for grounded theory research, as I look at our journal, it doesn't have the kind of significant implications that we would need in order to put the work out there and say this is important for leaders to consider. Sometimes articles duplicate other work that we have currently in the queue or work that we have already published. That's why I think it's really important to review about 3 years of the topics that the journal has already published. Sometimes, and this happened quite a bit during COVID, I think people dusted off some of their research that was done 5, 6, 7 years ago, and it really was outdated. The research, the references were outdated. The work itself, the research itself, the workforce has changed significantly over the past 3 years. And so whether that was still applicable or not was really called into question. Occasionally we get articles that are poorly written. Sometimes authors refuse to do revisions for whatever reasons. And I think I know one question in the chat about using librarians. One of the things that I think that we as editors really look at when we look at articles is if you have looked at some of the key individuals that are like source references on the topic. And so if you don't have primary references on a topic and you put it out there like it's your idea, that's really a concern. And that's where librarians can really help you in terms of reference checking who primary sources are for your topic. My advice to authors is that you do look at the table of contents. If you're targeting a journal, and I always say, as you write, don't do this randomly. Make sure that you write with a journal in your mind as you write the article. And so review the table of contents for the last 3 years of the journal to see if they've published on similar topics. It's always a great idea to cite some work from the journal in your manuscript. I think that's smart for writers to do that. Select the right journal for your work. We've talked about that, using the correct referencing system. I think Karen talked about that. Very often we get work in that's in APA when we're AMA. And see, not that that can't be corrected, but I think as an editor, it really calls into question whether you've really looked at the guidelines for the journal or not, and how serious you are in terms of your submission. I like to tell students to avoid identifying your work as a class manuscript that your professor has either told you is a great manuscript or is requiring you to submit. I think that we need to get away from that. You're professionals and you should be submitting the work as a professional. I always tell writers that, agree to revise your work. It will only get better. And when you do revise it, quickly turn the article around. That really impresses editors when people do very careful, considerate revisions. And lastly, I think all of us have had articles rejected. Know that. I write a lot and I've had articles rejected for a lot of different reasons. So find a new home for your work if it's not accepted. It's not the end of the world. You can pick that manuscript up and reformat it for another journal. Some support for authors, I think, as all of my fellow editors have mentioned, always email the editor directly as an author. If you have a question or you want some direction on how to formulate your manuscript. If you're working out there in a health system, please don't have your communications department do this for you. We really want to communicate directly with authors. My recommendation is, and we all four of us are members of the International Nurse Author Nurse Editor Association. NANE has a great website, and they have all of the, they vet all of the nursing journals. So you'll never be submitting to a predatory journal if you use the NANE website. Not only that, but it gives you lots of great information about different journals that you might not have even thought about for your manuscript. If you're a new author, Elsevier has some great resources on their publishing campus. We also have editing services, and authors sometimes ask me, should I use an editor or not use an editor? From an editor standpoint, it's your choice whether to use one or not. I think today, most of us that write a lot use probably Grammarly Premium as an AI type of editor for our work, and I always recommend that. We have our author guidelines on our Nurse Leader site, and follow them and be sure that you're using AMA referencing. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Laura and to I guess
Laura.
Laura and Laura. Yeah.
That's right.
Questions.
Right. Please, put your questions in the chat. This is the time for us to raise your questions. And there was one, first of all, there's a comment about the podcast being great. So great. I'm going to turn it now over to Laura Thomas. She'll take it from here in terms of what we have gotten in the chat so far.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all of you for those great tips and advice from your journals and telling us more about your journals. There are some questions in the chat. Would your journal publish manuscripts authored by an interdisciplinary group with the lead author a nurse if the topic is relevant to nursing leadership?
This is Karen Hill. I'll start. We do that all the time. In fact, I had an article published in January or February on a patient mobility project, and the lead author was a physical therapist. I'd like to see a nurse as an author in Jonah because I hope that it's involving nurses, but we publish multidisciplinary articles all the time.
And agree, we also do require one of the authors to be a nurse, but we really promote interprofessional writing teams and projects.
This is Donna Nikitas. I would amplify that and say absolutely. You know, we don't want not to encourage nurses to work with other professional colleagues, certainly interdisciplinary. And often I'm very happy when I see either librarian on the team or a statistician on the team as an author, because it only brings strength. So to build capacity is you should work with others, especially as a new author. If you don't have that capacity, work with others inside the discipline, but also outside as well. Great question.
Yeah, Nurse Leader, we also do the same. And I have to say that we have accepted excellent manuscripts from authors that were not nurses at all, but leadership experts that have written really high quality articles. So great question.
Okay, so the next question is, I think some of you saw this in the chat. I've heard that it's preferred that students be able to document they've worked with a librarian for their literature search in order to publish their manuscript. Can anyone speak to this?
That's not something I look for in Jonah. I think it's always a good idea, and I can tell you how valuable clinical librarians are, but it's not a requirement. I think with the new websites that are available in organizations now, nurses are being taught how to do their own literature reviews, and if they can do that, they should thank the librarian for teaching them how, but they don't need to have them involved in the team.
If the librarian was very influential and impact the author's ability to process and put the literature review together, what they can do is they can put an acknowledgement and thank them. I don't think they have to make them an author, but just acknowledge them at the end of the manuscript that they assisted.
And I would agree. I don't think it's a requirement. I think if you, as I said before, one of the problems that we sometimes see on articles is that authors don't use primary and important references that should be in there. And I think that's sometimes something that a librarian can point out to an author.
What requirements do you look for in your reviewers and your editorial boards?
Jonah's a little different. I really expect that to be a reviewer for us, you've published with Jonah, because I think your input is more valuable because you've been through the process, you understand the formatting and the flow. And for the editorial board, I look for openings when I have people that retire, and I'll look at who've been active reviewers that I feel like have a good perspective and will represent the journal well, as all the peer reviewers and editorial board do, and I'll ask them to move up.
I think for Nurse Leader, for editorial board, there are a couple of things. One is we really prefer some editorial board members that have themselves written, because that's really important. We're going to be asking them to review and to be guest editors. So the more that you have personally written, the better you probably are positioned for an editorial board position. We also look for geographic, ethnic diversity, just a whole range of different things. But I think writing yourself is important.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Rose. What I've been working on is the diversity of the editorial board in terms of thought, region, ethnicity, the whole 9 yards. I have someone who is actually in hospice care, VP for hospice along the continuum. So just trying to balance that out and agree that they're all published and that they all do review. They're on our reviewer list.
This is Donna. I would go back to what Karen said earlier, and that is we often will look back on individuals who have written successfully for us for our journal because they know the journal very well. But if you're interested in becoming a manuscript reviewer, that's how you become a better writer. When you read others' works, it makes you more cognizant of your own capacity to be a writer and to look at what scientific writing looks like when it's cohesive, clear, and substantial. And I know it appears intimidating, but it's really not. It's like any other skill that you've learned. Once you put the energy in, you've rolled up your sleeves and created some discipline and some parameters. That's why you go to school. That's why you get an undergraduate or graduate degree, so you can become an expert in your field. And the best way to do that is to write about it. and learn the skill and share your knowledge.
Hey, thank you. Karen had posted, if anyone is interested, we can address some tips for nurses who are in DNP and PhD programs who want to publish. And a couple of people said that they would be interested in hearing about that.
Okay, I'm going to talk fast because you got 3 academics on here with me. So, but I'm a DNP grad, so let me give you some experience. I think that students often are not feeling empowered to approach their faculty about trying to take some of their papers and get permission to write them in the guidelines of an author for a targeted journal. I think if faculty will be open to do that, it helps students sort of skip some steps and get their papers more ready. I suggest they never upload an academic paper straight from academics to a journal, because usually the lit reviews are a little too long and word count matters. I think there are things that have to be published to help people graduate that are not necessarily going to be as interesting to the reader. And then my last thing is don't waste a good paper. If you've done a good work as a DNP student or a PhD student, don't let too much time lag, publish your work, because I like to see those things get out there. And I think it sort of reinforces the value of your education because you're doing something that's going to help substantiate your expertise in the literature.
I have a lot of DNP students that I'm in contact with. And what I usually do is I ask to look at their work. And then I'll tell them what part of their work I think would be of most interest to our readership. I think that's what the key is. And sometimes what you might have focused the article on, I can give you an alternative suggestion in the way to look at, but I totally agree with what Karen has said. The work, you put so much into it, it would be a shame not to have at least one publication out of your DNP project.
And I would encourage you as DNP students to use the Squire guidelines.
Yes.
And yeah, right, Donna. And make sure that you're submitting it for publication for real, not just submitting it because you have to check a box on an assignment. Okay, this is a big deal to learn how to write in scholarly fashion, and to get published is also a big deal. So make sure you work with your faculty to ensure that that paper is solid and meets the journal guidelines.
Right.
I hate to interrupt, but our time is just about up. We just have a couple more quick announcements. I want to thank you all, panel. You were fabulous and a lot of great information. So I just want you to continue to join us for our future webinars. We will have, Rose, if you can go back. Yeah, we will have our next webinar after our summer break in August, and it will be on authentic nursing leadership with these 3 esteemed authors. Next slide. I want to remind you that the end of the year is our conference, and our conference this year will be in North Carolina at the Chapel Hill, or actually at Friday Center. It's called the Friday Center in Chapel Hill. It will be October 16th through the 18th. We are planning an in-person session, fingers crossed. I will assure you that we're going to be very, very safe and implement all the CDC guidelines with regards to spacing and all the hygiene things. And of course, we will keep you posted if we have to flip to virtual, but registration is open. Please, take the time to think about our conference and register on our site. There was one more question, and that is, how do those people who are unable, particularly the students that registered for today, how can they get the webinar? May I ask Kathy, Robert, how can they get the webinar for free?
This being recorded, has been recorded, and will be available on the ALSN website.
All right, and other websites that are not for free have a very small charge. Please, I encourage you to take a look at some of those past presenters. Thank you, and have a great day.